Welcome to Vanilla Club Podcast. I'm Jason S.C. Fong, your host. First, we'll acknowledge First Australians and recognize their continuous connection to country, community, and culture. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Hasinika Gamage, postdoc fellow at the Australian Research Council Training Centre for FAAB. It's a bit wordy, but I'll go ahead and say it. The Facilitated Advancement of Australia's Bioactives in the School of Natural Sciences at Macquarie University. Dr. Hasinika's expertise is in microbiome research, where she uses molecular microbiology, next-generation sequencing, and big data and bioinformatics to profile microbial communities within the GI tract and to explore their functions in a very multidisciplinary way. So with that, welcome, Dr. Hasinika.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you so much for coming on with us today. This is an exciting topic. It is a topic that impacts upon health. It impacts upon mental health and well-being, and it impacts upon digestion and so many other factors. So I guess the first question I'd like to start with is, should we think of the microbiome as an organ?
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting question. There's research showing that given the vast functions that the gut microbiome does, it could well be considered as an organ. It does a lot of functions that we can't otherwise do. So to start with, it helps us digest food that we can't digest, like dietary fiber, for example. We as human beings, we don't have all the enzymes to digest dietary fiber completely. So most of it goes undigested to our gut, and the gut microbiome digests it for us. And with that process, there's metabolites and other molecules that have been produced that we otherwise don't have the means of producing. Things like short-chain fatty acids, for example, they help to maintain our gut health. And in fact, for the gut, they produce a lot of energy. So we rely, they say around 90% of the time, rely on the molecules like short-chain fatty acids the gut microbiome produces to maintain our colon. The colonic cells use that as energy. So in that terms, given that it's doing things, different things that we can't otherwise do, it could really be considered as an organ, an unknown one that was a few years ago.
Absolutely. And we're going to put this on the screen just because we're approaching this from a layperson's point of view. Right here we have a diagram of the overall human digestive system.
Yeah.
And most of the action is happening in the large intestine.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But really, we should presumably take some type of systems view, because ultimately it's the interactions that really is where the action is happening.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, when you look at this diagram, what are some of the things, the components that are happening in this amazing world of human digestion?
Yeah. So there's a microbiome beginning from the mouth throughout the digestive tract. Which specific microbes inhabit these locations vary. It depends on the availability of nutrients, oxygen, pH, and all that. So there's a microbiome in our mouth. Most of them are attached to surfaces like our teeth and tongue and gums. So microbes that can make biofilms. Essentially, they can get together and they sort of make a layer of microbes. Those usually inhabit our mouth. And then coming down to the stomach, where the pH is really low, there's not a lot of microbes, but there are still microbes that can live in such harsh conditions. And then small intestine, large intestine. So starting from the oral tract and to the stomach, where the diversity is not that much. Coming down to the small intestine, large intestine, the diversity keeps increasing and the number of bacteria also increase. I always use the word bacteria, but there's microbiome is not just bacteria. There's the fungi, archaea, virus, but the
even
most
protozoa sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So the most abundant is bacteria. So this increase depends on, the availability of, say, for example, oxygen, where in the mouth there's bacteria, what we call aerobic bacteria, who can thrive in the presence of oxygen. They're usually present in the mouth, some in the stomach, and the upper part of the small intestine. As you go lower and lower, in our colon, especially the large intestine, there's not a lot of oxygen. So majority of the bacteria, they're anaerobic. They can't, some of them actually, they can't survive when there's oxygen present.
And you can't cultivate them, right? That's why it's been so difficult.
Exactly.
To map the human biome.
Exactly. So it's a very dynamic system. And also to address what you said about like that interconnection between these systems. We do know, it's like, for example, things like colorectal cancer. We do see microbes that usually inhabit the mouth. In a healthy person, it will just pass by the colon and exit our system. But in people with colorectal cancer, they inhabit the colon. They decide, okay, now I'm going to, just
hang out
and colonize the colon. And so there's a clear connection between these different microbiomes that's present within us.
Wow. So you mentioned the oral tract. So I've heard anecdotally that, for example, mouthwash is something that is good. Maybe it's not so good because it may have interactions with the biofilm that you mentioned that we didn't necessarily expect. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's this difficult balances, right?
Yeah, like, it's a balance, right?
Definitely. I think we just have to be careful in terms of like obviously when there's antibiotics available and like harsh disinfectants, like they could really impact the microbiome, not just, in the mouth, as well as like, the remnants, like, the gut and all that. There's some research available showing, an impact of that. I think the take home, I guess, like personally for me, it's more to sort of think about, like balancing between, the personal hygiene plus finding products that, maybe have some evidence to show that, like the ingredients are not as harsh. It's an interesting thing to look at, honestly.
Yeah. So then let's talk about some of the other components here, and we talk about the salivary glands. This is something that we think about in our family, whereby, when the kids are saying, mommy, daddy, is the food ready?
Yeah.
In fact, it might not be a bad thing to sometimes wait a little bit, because part of the digestion, I think, is actually happening up here with your salivary glands, right? You're getting the mouth watering, right?
Yeah.
For the food. And that is, I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on, again, some of these interactions that we don't think about or we don't talk about as much. There are a lot of bodily functions that are built in that are there to help us in terms of the amylase, right, in your saliva. What else is happening, let's say, in the earlier stages that our body is helping prepare us, and in this is the more alkaline stage, right?
Yes.
Before it gets down acidic, here into the acidic. So what are some other interactions that we can take note of that's happening earlier on before it gets into the colon?
No, definitely. So like you mentioned, in the mouth is where amylase get secreted. And that's where, the carbohydrate digestion begins. And as food travels to the stomach with the low pH, that's where, protein digestion start. And then when it comes to the small intestine, that's honestly where the digestion happens more widely, I guess. So there's carbohydrate digestion that happens, protein, and to some extent lipid digestion as well. So our food goes through all these processes that we have the enzymes. Our body can produce these enzymes to digest these components of food. And then the pH or the stomach is acidic. And then as it goes down to the small intestine and the large intestine, it gets back to a normal, like pH 7, 6.5 is the norm from the upper parts of the small intestine, and then it goes back to that. So, like I said, in the gut microbiome, what's key is dietary fiber, and to some extent, like bile metabolism also happens in the gut microbiome, and antioxidants and all that. But the food is sort of being prepared in a way, getting rid of the simpler carbohydrates that we can digest, and sort of preparing our food in a form that the gut microbiome likes, which is, rich in dietary fiber and all that.
Definitely. And then let's talk very generally for a moment about why gut health is important for a wide general audience who may be listening, and they hear this phrase in the media, right? It's popping up more and more. So for someone who's living in this world, studying it, you're publishing papers on it, what would you say to someone who says, okay, why is it important? Why should I care?
Yeah. So given the functions of the gut microbiome, it has impacts on our metabolic health, immune health, and even brain health. So for example, with digesting food that we can't digest, and producing those molecules, like I mentioned, the short chain fatty acids, for example, it's a cascade of events. So they can impact how sugar and lipids are being metabolized in our body, because they impact our liver, pancreas, and a lot of other organs in our body. And then in terms of immune system, because gut microbiome is very early in life, we get exposed to microbes, and the gut microbiome starts developing. And as the immune system develops, it's a coexisting system. And the gut microbiome has a way of shaping our immune system. And then brain health too. So a lot of the diseases that the modern diseases that we hear, like diabetes, different forms of cancer, brain health issues, and neurodegeneration, all that it's been shown that they have a link with the gut microbiome. So it's important, having a healthy, diverse microbiome is important to having a healthy, optimum life, I guess.
For sure. But even things that we think of linked to the brain, like serotonin, right? Isn't that somehow produced in the GI tract?
Exactly, yeah.
Right? And these are things that, from a popular general notion, we think of as just brain things, but really the linkages, it seems like, are being much more manifest, that they are actually derived deeper in the gut.
Yeah, no, exactly. So there's the molecular or the impact through things like serotonin and all that, and also through the direct. So the gut microbiome and the immune system, that link also helps with the gut-brain axis, for example. Also, the impact these molecules the gut microbiome produces has on the neural pathway. So at Macquarie University, my team is looking into neurodegeneration and gut microbiome. And what we're seeing is there's microbiome changes that happen well before the symptoms of neurodegenerative diseases. The particular disease that we're looking at is called
the mice study.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's called the Machado-Joseph disease. And we have a mouse model with the disease, and we are looking at gut microbiome changes, colonic functional changes in these animals. And what we're seeing is the gut microbiome and the colonic function actually changes before the symptoms, the known symptoms appear. And we're seeing supplementing metabolites of the gut microbiome can help reduce these symptoms. So things like short chain fatty acids, for example, they are helping. To be honest, like we still don't know how exactly the gut and brain communicate with each other, but some mechanisms, like you said, are like the metabolites that the microbiome produces, the impact of the microbiome on the neural pathways, like vagus nerve, for example, which physically connects the colon to the brain. So all these are interconnected systems, I guess. Although we don't understand the full, complete picture yet, we're increasingly getting to know that, it is an important factor when it comes to brain health and aging and all that.
Immune health, metabolic health.
Yeah.
It seems like the linkages are just too obvious now to ignore.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you take Ayurveda or some other, Chinese traditional medicine, there's a lot of emphasis, I think, on, for example, soothing drinks and tonics and certain elements to keep the body in balance, right? It's maybe more of a metaphorical thing, in a way, more philosophical, spiritual. But the funny thing is we're seeing more linkages, more actual hard science to back this stuff up. Would you agree with that?
100%. Like I personally come from a background with, like Ayurvedic medicine and all that. And I think you're right, because although we've heard about that from, a young age, and it's been around for thousands of years, the lack of evidence, the scientific evidence to support that, I think that's probably part of the reason that we didn't really realize, this has been around for so many years and we've known it for so many years. We talk about gut microbiome as if something that, in the last 10, 20 years is when it became like this popular topic, and a lot of research started happening around, I would say, last 10, 15 years. But so it is something that we've known for a long time. But again, I think when it comes to microbiome research, it also comes down to the lack of technology too, because a lot of the gut microbes, we can't culture them easily in the lab because they're anaerobic and they are a community. You can't take just one microbe and, grow it on a plate and see how it will react to, different diets or a different condition. It's a difficult experiment to do because they work as a community. They rely on different microbes to do different things. So until recently, a lot of the molecular biology, microbiology research relied on the culturing component. So, studies on pathogens, lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, those are the most, popular and prominent at that time. With next generation sequencing, where we now can look at a community as a whole, so there's no culturing that happens. You take the DNA out of the community and you do DNA sequencing. So you read the DNA makeup of that to then see what the composition of that community is. We didn't have the technology. The whole concept was relatively new, I would say 20, 30 years ago. But even then, it was a very expensive thing that you couldn't really easily do. But now we have the accessibility to that technology, and it's still expensive, but not as expensive. And the computing power too, because all these technologies, they produce a lot of data, these multi-omics techniques. So I think it's a combination of, there's multiple reasons to why we didn't have that scientific evidence back then. Although we knew it's important and it's there, we couldn't really dive in deeper like we can now to find these connections and have medical industrial applications like we do now.
Wow, that's so cool. And that links back to the bioinformatics too, right? I mean, there's some other enabling technologies that have kind of come online at the same time to make a kind of leap.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We were talking about the background and the traditional views to this. I'll just share, like I have a Chinese background, growing up, in Hong Kong, that exposure to a bit of the TCM, the certain foods they're either hot or they're cold, and when you're a kid, you're told these combinations that, you're thinking why, but every time you eat crab, you should complement it with ginger, because crab is cold, so therefore the ginger is warming, so it balancing out. But I guess the idea, it's trying to find balance, right? When you talk about this system, it seems like, as you said, there's got to be trillions of bacteria, right? That we're talking about, and as you said, it's not just like, one individual bacterium, it's communities, right? And they're like a little city. They're interacting in very complicated ways. The mathematics of those interactions, even now, it's still very hard to even guess, right? Yeah. So my guess is that just as an idea of balance, even if you use that and it's simplistic, my guess would be that that's maybe a helpful metaphor, because what you're trying to do is just make sure you don't tip the system so that the bad guys, pathogens, take over. Yeah,
100%. I think I would start with balance when it comes to microbiome. To a large extent, it is specific to an individual. We have certain microbial groups that are present in most of the adults or human beings, but the specific makeup of the microbiome varies from individual to individual, depending on what we've been exposed to as infants, whether we had siblings or not, whether we were growing up with pets or not, and then things like antibiotic exposure, environment, exercise, and all that. So it shapes what the microbiome of an individual is. But when it comes to the functions that the microbes do, different microbes can do similar functions. So when we profile the microbiome, we also look at the composition, how it is, but also the functions too. So the balance, maybe sometimes it comes down to the functions, what the individual bacteria can do. And when goes off balance, for example, if we continuously eat, highly processed, high fat, high sugar diet, that could then change the microbiome, the composition, as well as its functions, putting it off balance for the individual. Yeah, so I think that balance in microbiome is really important when it comes to the functions of the microbiomes and what they do. And that's sort of controlled by the external factors to a large extent, the external factors like diet and environment, medicine, antibiotics. Having a microbiome that's sort of balanced in a way that can produce the right metabolites and do regulate our systems in the optimum way, it is very important for that, because then as a community, the microbiome can do what they're sort of meant to do, right. By nature. Yeah.
Well, what they're meant to do, because you mentioned colorectal cancer, and that's so fascinating to think that if you mistreat this system, in a sense, you're basically allowing a bad actor to now say, okay, great, we're just going to create an environment where these cancerous cells can proliferate, and they're going to hang out in the rectum, in the lower part of the colon, and wreak havoc, right? But in a sense, it's more of your decisions, the confluence of all of those factors just led to a system out of balance, right?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to colorectal cancer, there's the genetic component to it.
Of course.
And then the morphological changes that happens in the colon with the structure, the functions and all that. We don't know yet whether microbiome, whether it's the microbiome changes first or microbiome changes happen as a result of the genetic and morphological changes in the colon. But what we do know so far is that the microbial changes that happen in the colon, they also can producing like genotoxins, cytotoxins that could initiate and sort of increase the progression of cancer. So it is the imbalance between the microbiome and the host. I think it happens sort of simultaneously. So I think it varies from disease to disease as well. So external things that we do, like, because a major risk factor for colorectal cancer is high consumption of red meat, alcohol. So, it could have a lasting impact on the gut microbiome. So I think it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And a major risk factor of colorectal cancer also happened to be something that changes the microbiome drastically. So I think it's just the whole system going out of balance with a lot of diseases.
Great. So let's talk, Dr. Hasinika, about your research and a couple of papers that you've published. Tell us a little bit about the mice study, and you mentioned the
Joseph disease,
and the importance of fiber in the diet.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher at FAAB, where we work with industry partners hand in hand. We work with bioactives largely, so essentially molecules that have a beneficial impact on people and animals. My focus is on probiotics and prebiotics. So probiotics are, what we find in the market, the live microbes that have a beneficial impact when we take them. Prebiotics are usually things like dietary fiber that provides nutrients for the gut microbiome
to do the fermentation.
Yeah.
Right?
So that part of my work is sort of looking at ways to change the microbiome, enhance the microbiome, and finding ways to improve prebiotics and probiotics to improve gut health. I also work on different diseases, colorectal cancer, neurodegeneration, Machado-Joseph disease being two of them, trying to understand the link of the gut microbiome with these diseases, how the microbiome changes with them, and also trying to find ways to change the microbiome as a way of managing these diseases. So when it comes to colorectal cancer, we are at the moment looking at a drug called metformin, which is an anti-diabetic drug. It's been shown in the literature that it can suppress colorectal cancer. So there was this Japanese study published a few years ago, I'd say. They saw in people who took metformin, the incidence of colorectal cancer was lower. And then there was a lot of follow-up studies on that to find, okay, actually metformin has a beneficial impact. But how it does it, we still don't know. So that's something we're working on because we think the microbiome has a role in all this. Metformin concentrates in the gut, and we know that it impacts the microbiome. So we are looking at taking a systemic sort of way of looking at it, not just the microbiome. We're looking at the colonic mucus layer, the proteins, the RNA. So we're sort of trying to get a full picture of what happens when there's metformin. When it comes to neurodegeneration, again, we're trying to see whether there's ways of changing the microbiome or supplementing with metabolites the microbiome produces, whether that will have a beneficial impact. So all this work at the moment we're doing in mouse models, with hopefully extending into human trials if successful. So when it comes to neurodegeneration, we have a paper that's under review at the moment, and we have a preprint available online showing that the gut functions change as well. So the time that it takes food to traverse the gastrointestinal tract in MJD, Machado-Joseph disease, it gets faster with these animals well before the symptoms appear. And we're now looking into ways of fixing that. So there's a diverse range of projects that I'm a part of, but more broadly, I'm sort of trying to understand the link of the gut microbiome with disease to sort of get a full picture of what's happening, and then trying to alter the microbiome and find therapeutics microbiome to at least like help manage these widespread diseases.
It's exciting work. I mean, it's thank you for sharing that. It's an exciting time to be in. It's not one field, it's overlapping fields, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the colonic mucus layer, which is not exactly the most appealing phrase in the English language. But it's vitally important because anyone with leaky gut, anyone with, is it IBD, has to face up to potential problems with their colonic mucus layer.
Yes.
Right.
So with a lot of those diseases, the mucus layer, because mucus layer is essentially the barrier between the microbiome and us. So having a healthy mucus layer is important because it is a physical
interface, right?
It's a physical and a chemical barrier between the microbiome, which could be thousands of different microbes. So with a lot of these diseases, IBD, colorectal cancer, the mucus layer gets thinner. So we come into close contact with the microbiome. And that's sort of the start of inflammation. And part of the problem is, so there's studies published showing that when the diet is low in dietary fiber, gut microbiome, they will digest them, they're happy, they get their nutrients. But then when there's low dietary fiber or conditions that sort of leading to it, the microbes then turn into the mucus layer because that also is made of mostly carbohydrates. So it's just to give a bit of a background about the mucus layer in the colon. It's made of a protein called mucins. And this mucin protein is highly glycosylated, meaning that this protein is covered in a sort of a layer of different sugars and carbohydrates. They're carbohydrates essentially. And these carbohydrates are important for the communication that happens with the host and the microbiome, because microbiome not only uses it as an energy source when there's limiting, say for example, low dietary fiber, then the microbiome turns into mucins and the glycans there as an energy source, and you start digesting it, making the mucus layer go thinner and thinner. And the other side of that story is that these glycans provide sort of like docking sites for gut microbes. Gut microbes have proteins to identify, there's so many different variety of these carbohydrates. And the gut microbes have the proteins, like specific microbes have the proteins to identify them and attach to them. That's what determines what sort of gets flushed out of the system and what sort of stays in the system. And that's one of the ways the microbiome composition is being shaped. So the changes to, like you mentioned, that happens to the mucus layer with different diseases, it could be due to, all the dietary changes and the physiological changes that happen with the disease, then leading to
morphological change, though, right?
Yes.
Because it's this interaction where, I don't know, eating tons and tons of emulsifiers, synthetic emulsifiers that humans really have never eaten before, and in the last 50 years, they're in everything.
Yeah.
Maybe they're harmless, but if you ask my traditional Chinese medicine person, they would probably say no.
Yeah.
And they would say, be a little bit cautious about it because, as you say, and now talking about the science perspective, it's now the chemical changes leading to physical changes where the mucus layer is now degrading, which can now have further issues that arise from it.
Yeah, 100%. So I think the modern processed food in general, the gut microbiome, like I said, likes more whole food, more dietary fiber, more diverse from different food sources. Like I was telling you before, even in my PhD where I looked at different dietary fiber having different impacts on the microbiome, that essentially the take-home message is it's important to have dietary fiber from diverse sources. So having this culture of, processed food, just from, like easy food, it's not really good for the microbiome because it can reduce the diversity, because different microbes having the ability to digest different things, if you're just giving them, one simple thing all the time, the other community, they don't have anything, no nutrients, nothing. So they sort of get out of the system because they don't have the nutrients to thrive in the gut. And it's been shown that in animal models, they've looked at different generations of animals to see that what happens to the microbiome in the first generation due to low dietary fiber gets carried over, and it is in a way that supplementing it later on in a later on generation doesn't really fix the problem, because you don't have the microbiome to digest the dietary fiber. Because if the fiber digesting bacteria vanish from the system and that doesn't get passed on to the other generations in an animal model, just supplementing fiber wouldn't fix the problem. So it is a bigger problem.
So speaking about fiber, so the quality, the quantity of fiber, these things are important, right? And presumably it's, for example, when I eat raw kale, it doesn't really agree with me that way. It's too coarse.
Yeah.
So maybe pumpkin is more digestible, spinach or certain more digestible fibers are a better mix for certain people based upon, again, as you mentioned earlier, the individual microbiome that's applied to that person that was built up from the time they were born.
Yeah. I think in addition to what you said about like quality and quantity, I think the diversity is also important. So I think a diverse, like different sources of fiber is important. And I'm not in a position to comment about like which specific ones, but I do think, sort of being mindful of including different sources of, say, like green leaves or vegetables, fruits, legumes, like different sources of that, sort of in a more purposeful way, I think in generally will help anyone.
Yeah.
But obviously, I think I'm not in a position to comment about it because of, I'm a scientist. So maybe, it is something to sort of discuss with your doctor or a dietitian to see what sort of matches an individual.
Definitely.
But having said that, a diverse range of food sources, I think it's important anyway.
No, definitely. I don't mean to put you on the spot about any specific dietary advice. You should definitely consult your dietitian about that. But I think as a microbiologist, there's a unique perspective at like a chemical level that, this microbial level that is so interesting that, it's not to say that it trumps, a nutritionist's advice or a dietitian's advice, but it's so interesting to think about how what's happening at that microscopic level, it's entering the mainstream.
Yeah,
right?
No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the microbes, there's like different, like we discussed earlier, they're a community. So there's microbes who can digest, who are more generalists. Essentially, they can digest a larger range of fiber. There's a phyla called Bacteroidota in our gut microbiome. They largely consist of generalists. So they have the capacity to digest a large range of things. But there's another phylum called Firmicutes. They, not all of them, but most of them, they have specific sort of fiber linkages that they can target. So I think essentially what I'm trying to get at is to sort of enhance the function and the composition of, so both phylums are important for our gut microbiome, and they, Bacteroidota and Firmicutes, they represent at least more than half of our microbiome in all of us, in like generally, if not more. So those two are the main players. they're at a higher taxonomic level. So when we come down to species level, we're talking about thousands of different microbes, but classified under that larger umbrella. So what I'm trying to get at is it's important to give nutrients for all the groups of microbes, and then it makes it important to have that balanced diet in a very, a microbiology perspective. For microbes to thrive, they need the nutrients and the right conditions, and knowing which food groups or which type of dietary fiber, I think it really helps to sort of make decisions, I guess, when it comes to diet.
Absolutely. And I think it's not controversial at all to say that you want diversity in the diet, that some of these extremist diets where someone says, okay, I'm only going to eat meat, or arguably, right, there'd be many people that would disagree with this, but arguably the vegan diet is an extreme diet, because even Jains in India had dairy, right? Even Jains, which, they I don't think they ate eggs, but they still had some dairy. So I think the key thing is, if you're going to be vegan, if you're going to take on a carnivore diet, my layman's perspective would be really only jump into that with doing the proper research and make sure that you're really ready for that, because you could be missing out on a lot of feeding of all of these different phylums that need nutrients.
Yeah,
and undernourishing yourself.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about the gut microbiome as a gut microbiome researcher, that's like a big no-no for gut microbiome, especially given that there's the dietary fiber that's really important for the microbiome. So I think it's sort of like different diets, like obviously it comes down to personal choice, but I think we come back to balance again, because, right, having that balance in terms of diet as well, I think it's quite important for the gut microbiome, having that diversity.
And again, when we talk about ferments too, right? The earliest fossil examples of human consumption of bread, I read, go back something like 17,000 years. So humans have been tinkering and toying with different ferments for a long time, right? And we've co-evolved with a lot of these ferments. And that's why I think if you're vegan, you're eliminating cheese, which, if you're vegetarian, at least, you know, that could be something you're missing out on. Again, not a dietary, directive guidance, but I'm just saying from a common sense point of view that you're potentially missing out on some areas of diversity.
Right. So like when it comes to like things like yogurt, like cheese, and even like kimchi and other fermented food, it's a great way of giving the microbiome the microbes as well as the nutrients that they like. Say, for example, like yogurt, for example. A lot of the yogurts, they have lactobacillus, bifidobacteria. They're the typical ones that you would have.
Live active cultures.
Right. Yeah. They like their lactic acid producing bacteria. They thrive with the carbohydrates that's present in milk. And having that combination introduced to the system, it works because you are not only giving the probiotics, but you're also giving the nutrients that the microbes like. And on the topic of fermented food, there's this sort of like a recently introduced concept of postbiotics. It's essentially supplementing the gut microbiome directly with metabolites. So with prebiotics and probiotics, we're sort of either introducing different microbes or beneficial microbes, or the nutrients that the microbes like to consume. With postbiotics, it's supplementing with the metabolite. So the metabolite that the beneficial microbes will produce, you're sort of getting a step ahead and supplementing the metabolites. So in a lot of prebiotic products that's available in the market, they're also thinking about that at the moment, where there's postbiotics available for consumption. And the thing about with fermented food, it's a mix of all these. There's the metabolites that the microbes have produced. There's the microbes, the nutrients for microbes. So it's a great source of nutrients for the gut microbiome in that sense.
Absolutely. And because we don't have the human enzymes to do all of this work, we must depend on all trillion of these actors to come together to help us break down and give us nutrients.
Yeah,
right?
100%, yeah.
Otherwise, we won't survive.
Yeah.
So when we talk about postbiotics, that's basically saying, let's just feed them directly.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about stimulating them or just encouraging them. It's about just like give it straight to them.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it's sort of not trying to fix issues with the microbial balance in terms of composition or their functions at a sort of a starting level, whereas it's sort of supplementing downstream metabolites to the system. So obviously it won't fix the problem. It won't sort of change the microbiome, at least the root problem, I would say. Because, for example, like things like short-chain fatty acids, there's microbes in the gut microbiome who use short-chain fatty acid as their nutrient source. So it's like a chain of events that happens. So obviously we won't be able to impact the pathways that are in play before the production of that particular metabolite, but downstream it will have an impact. But like supplementing with these different postbiotics, one of the benefits is actually it's more controlled. Whereas, say, for example, you want to enhance the production of a short-chain fatty acid there's a short-chain fatty acid called butyric acid. It's been linked with better brain function, colonic health and all that. And it is very important molecule for our well-being. Now, relying on prebiotics to produce it, we don't know at what concentration, what's the dose. So it's difficult to translate into clinics, for example. Whereas we are not there with postbiotics yet, but so the idea is it could be a bit more controlled in terms of an intervention. Whereas it's sort of in a more holistic perspective, it's sort of hijacking the system at, a certain stage of the pathway than sort of looking at it more cohesively.
It's sort of orchestrating it.
Yeah.
It's more just
Fixing
surgical.
That one. Yeah.
But presumably there's room to have, in that spirit of diversity, to have a blend of them, right? And you talked about therapeutics. If you have someone who has IBD or they have leaky gut or they suffer from any of the diseases that we've enumerated on the podcast, someone, dietitian maybe could prescribe a cocktail of different therapeutics that drew upon a variety of probiotics.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it is sort of a goal of gut microbiome research to get to that level. Part of the problem or a limitation at the moment of doing that is we have limited knowledge on, first of all, starting with probiotics, we heavily rely on lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. And part of the reason is they're easier to grow in the lab. Lactobacillus especially, they don't need the anaerobic conditions that they can survive when there's oxygen present. So they've been studied for a longer time. So we know a lot more about them, and therefore they're sort of considered the good bacteria. Whereas, like we discussed earlier, the gut microbiome is more complex, where there's multiple good players, multiple bacteria that do beneficial things for us, which we don't have them as a form of probiotics. So there's a lot of research and a lot of development needed in that path too, to produce probiotics that sort of captures the complexity of the microbiome. The other limitation is we don't know a lot about that prebiotic, probiotic, postbiotic, like what really works together. We know that a lot of commercial products working with the industry as a part of FAAB there's a lot of commercial products that put together different great sources of things together as products. Whether they benefit each other in a complex community, that hasn't been really looked at. And we know very little about, which fiber to pair up with this particular probiotic and then which postbiotic to add to that. So there's a lot more research needed to get to that point. But I think, like I said, that sort of idea of supplementing with the different bacteria or communities of bacteria with the nutrients that they like and metabolites to enhance their metabolic activity is a sort of a great way of altering the microbiome and thinking about gut microbiome therapeutics, in my opinion.
It seems like a lot is happening right now. There was, I don't know, a decade, 2 decades where there were things that were emergent, but now it seems that some like major breakthroughs are about to happen.
Yeah, I think with gut microbiome or microbiome research in general, because of its applicability and sort of like the general importance for health and well-being, the commercialization sort of got a bit ahead of the science. So I think we're sort of like catching up to it to find, what is it actually beneficial or what combinations will work. But there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of work happening right now to understand how the gut microbiome is linked with diseases and how we could sort of change the microbiome in a more, I guess, a meaningful way, and in a more targeted way. Like, because if the microbiome is different in each one of us, we have 2 ways of doing it: more individualized therapeutics or diets, personalized, or finding ways to not rely so much on specific groups of bacteria, but how to change the microbiome as a community, or use things like synthetic biology, for example, or different, say, like phage therapy, or thinking about the host, for example, the colonic mucus layer. So there's a lot of work going on in the field looking at that angle too. Can we change the microbiome in a more targeted way compared to the more traditional prebiotics? Because it's more like a shot in the dark. We're supplementing with this dietary fiber, just hoping this will change, but it's not really targeted to a specific group of bacteria. That's what I'm trying to get at. So like there's a lot of research sort of trying to enhance the specificity of the therapeutics.
So which areas of the commercialization do you find the most promising, the most exciting right now? I mean, I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, but what gets you excited in terms of some of the commercialization that's like right on the horizon?
I think as a scientist, I think that the microbial consortia idea, where they're not simply putting together different bacteria to produce as a form of probiotic, but it's more purposeful. It's sort of thinking about a community and having that diversity of microbes and having that complexity to products with matching dietary fiber, matching postbiotics. It is happening to some extent in the industry, in the commercialization world. It's still not well researched and we still don't know the specific mixes, but we are heading to that direction. So I think as from a commercialization point of view, I think personally I'm more excited in that complexity of products that we have and the research that's ongoing even at Macquarie University to understand. So I think the 2 things should go hand in hand, but I think appreciating the complexity of the microbiome as a community and sort of like reflecting that in our products, I think I'm excited about that, sort of people understanding, or like just giving just one thing, one magically change the microbiome, like supplementing with one microbe won't change the microbiome because it's an established community. I think that's being understood and looked at in the commercial world as well. So, yeah.
Do you think there's a small paradox in a way in that on one hand, we know so much more, but yet if you look at, let's take American gut flora, it's actually gone down significantly, right? Even in 100 years. And if you compare it to, for example, some indigenous peoples around the world, it's like a third the level of diversity.
Yeah.
So it's like we need a lot of therapeutics for our modern life, but there is a bit of a paradox, right? In that more traditional ways of life actually had way more healthy microbiomes.
Yeah, no, 100%. So there's studies as well, multiple studies, like you said, comparing the microbiomes of more sort of industrialized communities, comparing it to more, like the traditional people. And there's this one study that was published a few years ago now, comparing the microbiome of, I think, so tribal groups in Nepal, but they have different lifestyles. So I think it's a great study because it sort of keeps the genetic diversity and the environmental impact somewhat controlled, but they have hunter-gatherers to more like farmers and more sort of industrialized, the urban living people. And then they also compared it to the US, like microbiome of people from the US. What they saw was a reduction in the diversity, and it starts from a very diverse microbiome from the hunter-gatherers, and with a reduction in especially dietary fiber digesters, and also an increase in like fat digesting bacteria and all that when it comes as we get more towards the modern
lipids,
lifestyle.
right?
Yeah, so it's so true that having that sort of the ancient diet and all that is important, but I think practically it is difficult for for people who are living in a city to and having busy lifestyles to adapt to that. So like I think therapeutics come in to play in that situation where we can supplement, and we can, obviously having a healthy diet, a diverse diet is important, very, very important. But maybe these supplements can help to some extent to enhance that.
Definitely. There's no silver bullet. There's no one microbe that can just solve something. There's no antidote in our modern society to say, okay, make one change and then everyone's going to have a healthy microbiome.
Yeah.
It's an iterative process. There's going to be trial and error. It's so many different factors. I mean, it's, as you said, personalized. There's, as you said, the communities, and we're only just now starting to discover what those interactions are within the communities too. So there's so many different factors. So, when we think about just health in general, I mean, it's not dietary, I don't want to put you on the spot about that, but what are some things, again, this is more from a microbiology, and we covered some of these topics, but just in summary, thinking a little bit about rules of thumb, what are some things that, let's say somebody is suffering from leaky gut, and I know from personal experience, there's many people who suffer from this, some version of it, because in some ways it's the fast food, it's the processed food, it's also the speed of the consumption, because we eat alone a lot of times. I mean, this is not really how humans are supposed to eat. If you come from a big family, or if you in other cultures, I think this is much more Western problem of eating alone. But when I eat alone, I eat very fast. And when I really think about it, I think actually that's really bad. It's really bad, because your body's like, oh my God, there's fat, there's carbohydrates, everything. And it's just going in so fast. And fast food is designed to be not just delivered fast, but also consumed fast. So I guess just in summary, what are some things for us to, not in terms of advice, but what are some things for us to think about? If somebody who's listening to this has leaky gut, or they have some version of some digestive issues that they're linking back, and maybe they're connecting the dots between maybe I'm not that happy and I've been eating a lot of fast food, right? And I haven't been moving and things like that. What are some things that or some literature for other people to investigate to educate themselves on?
No, 100%. So I guess like even not linking to a particular disease as for generally for anyone. Well, there's studies showing that there's a study actually done at Macquarie University looking at like a smoothie, a milkshake type, like really calorie dense but low nutrient breakfast given to I think it was a trial done like through student volunteers, and compared it to a more balanced breakfast, and there were big differences between how they felt. And so it is very important, the source of food and where it's coming from. And like you said, also not only the type of food, obviously we discussed how dietary fiber is important, how eating vegetables, fruits, all that is important. And something that I heard in another interview was that if your grandma doesn't recognize this as food, that's probably not good for your gut microbiome. So like real food is important for gut health in general. Also, like how we eat it, when we eat it is also important. And it's been shown that not only our body, like the other organs, but the microbiome also is in rhythm with the circadian cycle. So the light and dark cycle impacts the microbiome, the composition, their functions as well. So as human beings, we are meant to eat when there's light, and the microbiome also changes with that. There's studies published looking at restricting, so these are animal studies, restricting animal diets to the time that they're meant to eat, and restricting food consumption, say for example, like in animals during the light cycle, because they're nocturnal animals. It has significant impacts on the health. Not eating when we are not supposed to eat. Even in human trials, they've shown that it has a significant impact on how the gut microbiome and our general well-being as well. We looked into a few years ago fasting, and so that even this is a bit controversial. Even the animals were given a high-fat diet. When there's fasting was in the picture, these animals who were given a high-fat diet performed way better in terms of their metabolic health, gut microbiome, just by not eating like this was like we did it for 24 hours 2 times a week. But even like less strict diets have been shown to impact the microbiome as well. And this is when the animals actually ate similar amounts during the week. They ate similar amounts to the group that was not fasted. So it doesn't come down to the caloric value, but it comes down to like restricting food for certain times of the day.
So the same amount of calories,
yes,
but distributed differently.
Exactly.
Led to different results.
So I think it's the type of food, it's how we eat it, when we eat it, all that comes into play when it comes to the gut microbiome, and it's having that balance between the other organs the microbiome has an impact on, and knowing what to eat and when.
So presumably eating late at night, it's just generally, it doesn't matter if you're really healthy, if you're not that healthy, it's probably a bad idea.
Yeah. I mean, even in terms of the microbiome, it's not that good.
Right. Because I can imagine that also because you're not active, many physical processes are shutting down, right? So the engine's not ready, it's not primed, right? And then maybe breakfast, is it a reasonable rule of thumb to say that if your calories are potentially shifted earlier in the day, that may be better than evenly spread out?
I mean, to my knowledge, I don't know whether it's been looked at in the context of the microbiome, whether it will have an impact. but yeah, for the microbiome, what's being looked at is sort of like eating, because it comes down to the fiber digesters get more active in a certain period. Like, so during the light cycle for us, the fiber digesters, they become more abundant in our gut microbiome. And whereas the more metabolite, the secondary digesters, for example, the generalists, like the Bacteroidota that we spoke about earlier, the generalists start the digestion process, and then it takes time for the secondary, the digesters to come into play to sort of complete the process. But then which microbes are more abundant at different times of the day really vary depending on the nutrient availability.
And carbohydrates are broken down earlier than lipids.
Yes.
And earlier than proteins.
Carbohydrates,
right?
Yes, yeah.
Right. So how the macronutrients are composed also must have some effect, right? That, again, there's things to think about, and it probably varies by person to person, but maybe somebody's makeup can handle more complicated mix. Other people do better if it's a simpler mix of macronutrients, right? But these are things to, again, but think about balance, listen to your body, right? And just try to be a little bit more attuned to the signals that your body's sending you, right?
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
So how did you dive into this? You clearly have sharp scientific brain. You could have gone into physics or this or electrical engineering or how did you end up here, and what was your passion that came into play that led you into this field?
I think molecular biology more broadly, it started when I was in school, where, you know, I heard about like DNA and all that. Like, thinking about it now, I'm like, oh, that was like very basic. But I think even, like, at that time I was like, oh, this is really fascinating, like how we function, like from DNA to RNA to protein, and how neat it is. And I always liked doing molecular biology for that reason. And that's how I sort of got into this stream of science. Gut microbiome, I got exposed to relatively, like, so I started my PhD in end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And that's when the microbiome started becoming popular. Not so, it's like, you know, the probiotics and prebiotics were not as widely available as it is now. And it wasn't like a general sort of like a media topic to this level back then. But when I got to know how, you know, the basics of microbiome and how important it is, I think that naturally drew me into it. And the techniques that I use, you know, the DNA sequencing, the bioinformatics and all that is something that I like doing. So I think it's a combination of the biological, like the importance of the microbiome, but also, you know, the techniques, how cutting edge they are, I would say. I think those were the reasons for, you know, why I was drawn into this really field. Cool. Yeah.
That's really cool. And let's face it, luck also plays a factor, you know. I mean, sometimes you could have gone, there's subfields of microbiology, right? Virology, COVID or something like that. I mean, it's not luck. I don't want to say that. What I'm saying is what gets hot. It's no one knows. You start a PhD, it's 4 to 7 years. Who knows what's going to be hot and what someone's hiring for at the end of the PhD and so on. But I think you found a very hot topic.
I think it comes down to like that component of passion that's really important. Like, because like you said, you wouldn't really know what becomes popular and all that. And and for a scientist, in a way, it's not real. I mean, it is relevant when you are thinking about grant funding and all that, but not quite. Like, you know, because it is sort of like driven by passion and like that interest. So yeah, I think having that sort of like clear direction and passion is I don't know, in my experience, that's what sort of like drives a scientist. So I guess, yeah, I mean, it's great because the fact that it is a hot topic, a lot of the people know about the gut microbiome. So like for me to start a conversation, it's much easier than someone who's, you know, doing science that not a lot of people are familiar with. So I have that benefit 100% and, you know, having that industry engagement and all that. So it's easier to communicate because it's become very popular and a hot topic. Yeah.
Have you been to North Queensland?
So
there's a story.
Yeah. When I did my PhD, I worked with an industry partner. They produce a dietary fiber product that's based off sugarcane.
Oh, right. Okay.
So yes, I went to sugarcane farms over
that's
there.
so cool. That's so cool. So our farm is just south of Cairns, Vanilla Club, and you have a standing invitation. Basically, I've been inviting everyone who's come on the show to come visit.
No, it will be amazing. Yeah.
We're in 2026, we're going to be doing some like workshops and things like that. Also, we have planned a sort of foraging workshop where we're aiming to have some of the harvest from our own homegrown produce, but also combine that with some foraged foods in our amazing ecosystem nearby. We have the Great Barrier Reef, we have the riverine system, the estuarine system, mountain, and then, you know, people don't realize it, but like 99% of the bananas in Australia come from, it's like 50 kilometers of Cairns, you know, the sugar cane, as you know, it's just one there. I mean, we're the wettest, most biodiverse part of the whole continent. So, we'd love to at some point have you come visit. And thank you again so much for sharing and coming on the show and bringing your expertise and some great anecdotes and good humor.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.